Hello ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us again here on our planted stage for a very special talk in this year's Natural Abundance Unnatural Waste programme. In this talk, titled Hope in Hell, I'm delighted to welcome a man who can now firmly be classified as a national treasure and a veteran of the environmental movement, Jonathon Porritt. In some ways, I'm sad to say Jonathon was and is ahead of his time. Because while the twin climate and biodiversity crisis may be at the forefront of many of our minds, today, for Jonathon, this has been a fight he has chosen to fight since the early 1970s, when he was one of the founding members of what is now known as the Green Party, or Ecology Party as it was known then. Back then, green issues were niche and easily swatted aside, dismissed as scaremongering by vested corporate and political powers. Today, as more and more evidence emerges of the undeniable damage we have done and continue to do to our planet, it is clear those sounding the environmental alarm in the 1970s should have been listened to. While championing sustainability throughout his adult life, Jonathon has advised government, written books and tirelessly campaigned for a more just society where nature and the environment are given a fair hearing and the longer-term needs of the planet are valued above the short-term needs of consumer-driven societies. And while many of us who have followed the seemingly relentless denigration of our planet's natural resources in pursuit of profit for the few, which has caused undeniable damage to the climate, human society and natural ecosystems, could be forgiven for feeling downbeat about our prospects of turning things around, Jonathon, I'm delighted to say, is taking a different view. In his latest book, Hope in Hell, among other things, Jonathon highlights a new breed of environmental activist and the scientific and technological advances which already exist and are capable of solving the climate and biodiversity crisis should we choose to take them. But time is of the essence. The next decade will define humanity's relationship with the Earth, and if we get it wrong, the consequences will be dire. But all is not lost, and if anyone should know, it is Jonathon Porritt. And it is with very great pleasure, Jonathon, that I welcome you to Planted today. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us.
Thank you, Sam. Delighted to be here.
Well, Jonathon, why don't we start off? The title of your book is Hope in Hell. Why should we be hopeful about the future?
Very good question, to which there is no easy answer. And this book was actually written nearly 3 years ago now. And I'm sorry to say that in the intervening 3 years, the sort of hope element has gone down a little bit. The hellish element has definitely gone up quite a lot. And retaining that sense of hope in those hellish conditions is genuinely getting harder. The planet sends back at us on a more and more regular basis incredibly harsh lessons about our lack of wisdom in the way that we live on this planet. But you're right, Sam. Of course, it is still imperative to point out that it's not too late to avoid a slow, gradual decline towards the abyss of extinction, which is how some people see it at the moment, including, I might add, some scientists, which is slightly unnerving. It is not too late to avoid that. But as you said in your introduction, the only reason it's not too late is because we have got a very small window of time to do what we need to do. And if we don't do it within that window of time, then we definitely head into some exceptionally painful periods of time ahead of us, because we will have lost this opportunity to do it in a sensible way.
I think you talk about in the book about the tragedy of foresight, the tragedy of looking further, or not being able to recognise what's coming down the track. And the fact is now that people are seeing what in the 1970s people were thinking this is a long way down the track. They're seeing it now. I mean, can you talk a little bit about those principles and what's happening now that you see with your own eyes?
The science of climate change in the old days, so certainly when I was at Friends of the Earth in the 1980s, the science was a lot about computer models. It was people trying to project into the future, pretty much guessing what would happen when concentrations of greenhouse gases reached a certain level in the atmosphere. And it was all based on these integrated assessment models, as they're called, computer models, to generate data for politicians to work on. That isn't the case now. Now we're working with real-time, real-world hard-edged data about things that are happening today in that world. So whether you're talking about climate impacts from heat waves, flooding, droughts, storms, floods, it's a very long list, this, very gloomy list, I'm sorry to say. The real-world data now gives us every indication that we need about what is going to happen in the future if we don't start getting on top of this emergency right now. And as I have to point out from time to time, all of this today, all of these climate disasters are a consequence of no more than a 1.1 degrees centigrade rise since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Doesn't sound like much, does it? That's maybe 1.2 these days because we've been putting our back into this warming story. So maybe it is now 1.2 rather than 1.1. But everything that we see today, floods, droughts, what's happening in Pakistan, the heat wave in China, the nightmare of the forest fires in so many parts of the world, our own mini heat wave in the summer here, all of that is down to 1.1 degrees centigrade of increased temperature since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And we're now heading pretty rapidly towards 1.5, and maybe beyond that, even to 2 degrees or above 2 degrees. I don't want to talk about above 2 degrees today, Sam, if that's all right, because it's definitely not, it won't be conducive to your digestive systems as you enjoy your lunches.
But you described what we've had this summer as a mini heat wave in Europe, 40 degrees plus in parts of the south of England, unprecedented, unknown temperatures, extreme temperatures. So if let's not go to 2 degrees because it might be too much for us to handle, but let's talk about if we got to 1.4, 1.5. What I mean, in the immediate future, we're talking the next couple of decades, what could our world look like?
I mean, it's all a little bit arbitrary, this, because obviously things don't suddenly happen because the average temperature gets up to 1.4 rather than 1.5. It's not quite like that. We use that just as a way of popularizing the notion of what these average temperature increases look like. But it is perfectly clear that for every additional unit of increased average global temperature, we must anticipate increased intensity, increased frequency of climate-induced impacts. And the thing that perhaps we ought to remember on top of that is that these temperature increases, they're not uniform all around the world. So we talk about an average temperature increase of X, and that's data aggregated from hundreds of different temperature measuring sites all around the world. But the temperature is rising much faster in some parts of the world than it is in other parts of the world. And the thing that really makes climate scientists, it almost causes them to weep, is the fact that the average temperature in the Arctic is increasing 4 times faster than the average temperature globally. 4 times. And of course the Arctic is pretty critical in terms of sea ice and permafrost and the Greenland ice cap. You know, it's sort of got rather a lot of big systems up there that we do not want to flip into a state of collapse. So that figure of times 4, that's the one that really gets them focused. Because,
as you say, if that does happen and those triggering systems, people hear about cascade effects, and it's become much more as part of mainstream conversation now. But can you explain to people what those once those triggers are hit, essentially, and those buttons are pressed and those cascade effects happen, what are we literally talking about?
Sam has got 1 or 2 questions on his list that do get a little bit happier as we dig down into this. Okay,
I promise.
But we will. So a tipping point is the point at which a given climatic system ceases to demonstrate the kind of equilibrium, continuity that it's demonstrated for however many thousands, hundreds of thousands of years it might be. And because of these climatic factors, tips into a different state. So today, on the news, those of you who are plugged into the news this morning, or you might have sought to avoid it for all sorts of different reasons at the moment, but those who were plugged in, you may have heard a headline about what's happening in the Amazon. And the figure that was released this morning was that the rates of deforestation in the Amazon have been literally double, twice the rates of deforestation as occurred up until 2015, and between 2015 and 2019 we saw double the rate of deforestation in the Amazon because of Mr. Bolsonaro and his planet plundering ways. Now, there is a point at which the Amazon ceases to be what is called a carbon sink, where it is taking CO2 down out of the atmosphere, locking that carbon away in the trees and the biomass, in the forest as a whole, and the roots and everything else. It ceases to do that sequestering role, and it becomes a carbon emitter. Because the forest has been so thinned out, so damaged, average temperatures are increasing, the vitality, integrity of the forest has been so badly damaged that it ceases to suck up the CO2 and it starts to emit it. That is a tipping point that we really, really do not want to see. So Amazonian scientists rather than the Arctic scientists were saying, we are so close to going over this tipping point. And there is some evidence that in some parts of the southern Amazon, in Rondonia and elsewhere, that we may already have parts of the Amazon that are emitting CO2 rather than actually sequestering it.
So the Amazon and the Arctic in perilous danger, real and present danger, but as you rightly said, I do have some slightly happier questions. So, and the book is titled Hope in Hell. So what are the reasons to be hopeful? I'm particularly interested in your take on the new generation of activists that has emerged, certainly in the last 5 years or so. But what's the role of activism, and where is your optimism within there?
I think this is really important. I mean, we've forgotten this a bit because COVID has impacted on so many parts of our lives, and actually people find it quite difficult sometimes to think back to what happened in 2019, when a combination of Extinction Rebellion becoming very influential in the way in which they impacted on our politics, and the astonishing growth in young people's climate activism, Strikes for Fridays, other global campaigns to persuade politicians to do more about climate change. 2019 was an extraordinary year. It changed the face of the climate movement. It made it much more vital, much more inclusive, much more dynamic in terms of the arguments that it was making, and it got through to many more people. Then came COVID. And frankly, for almost all young people's campaigning endeavors, that was it. It was just impossible to maintain that intensity of campaigning passion when the whole world was preoccupied with COVID, and the horizons for young people, as you will recall, just literally closed in on them, either because they were literally locked down in their homes, or because their schools were barely functioning or not functioning in the way they were used to. Their ability to be with friends was limited. The whole of the youth movement in 2020 and 2021 really took a hammering. We've seen signs of it coming back in 2022, but it is still difficult. And for me, it probably isn't until next year that we'll see a resurgence in that young people's campaigning voice. For me, that's critical, because we are talking here about justice between generations as well as justice within generations. And it's young people who are primarily going to be the generation that loses out because of what we failed to do. So I do see that campaigning voice, that young person's voice, being absolutely critical. And I personally spend quite a bit of my time now working with young people, doing what we can as I can as an older generation to try and support them in what is a really big challenge.
Talk a little bit about politics. You touched on Extinction Rebellion there. and this is going to be a multifaceted sort of answer, I'm sure, but as so many of them are. But I mean, in simple terms, Jonathan, you were there, I mean, around 1974, I think, when you were first involved with the Ecology Party. You hear so many people say, I would love to vote for Green Party. I support many of the principles that they stand for and things that they stand for. I see that the world is being destroyed. I stand with the Green Party, but I'd never vote for them because it's a wasted vote. So, I mean, what is it that's stopping people from voting for the Green Party on a much bigger scale? And also, why don't they get the representation that many people think they deserve in Parliament?
I stood 7 times for the Ecology Party, and I met a lot of people who said, I really love what you're doing, Jonathan, but I'm not going to waste my vote on such a completely forlorn political proposition. And by forlorn, they meant you'll never get anywhere in terms of political power, because you'll never beat the system. And the only time at the national level where we've beaten the system in a general election is through the completely amazing Caroline Lucas, who I think many people consider to be one of the most outstanding politicians anywhere in the world at the moment in terms of the quality of leadership that she brings to this as the Green Party MP in Brighton. We did well in the European elections because they have a rather more intelligent electoral system, not the first-past-the-post system that we have here. And the truth of it is, in a first-past-the-post system, it's very hard for the Greens to get more votes than any other candidate. It does happen more at local elections. Green Party is picking up a lot of seats now at the local elections, which is great. So the answer to all of this, of course, is electoral reform, proportional representation. Though some people do find this stuff just a touch tedious, trust me, it is really absolutely fundamental. And there is a little moment, there's a thing happening. When's the Labour Party conference? Is it next week?
I think it is next week. Yeah.
Next week, where the motion for the Labour Party formally to accept the need for electoral reform through proportional representation is coming to the Labour Party conference. They will vote on it again. It very narrowly got defeated last year because of some reactionary union voices. This year, some of those unions have changed their position, and this year it will probably be accepted by conference. Now, that doesn't mean to say that Keir Starmer will automatically go into the next election saying, vote for me because I'm going to bring you electoral reform. He probably won't. But even so, it is going to be so important to have at least one of our 2 major parties, apart from the Lib Dems and the Greens, so the 2 major ones, to have one of them, Labour, out there rooting for PR. That is really and truly very, very important. So I'm very involved in the Make Votes Matter movement. If you've ever had a chance to get stuck into an organisation that does this kind of campaigning work around electoral systems, it's a brilliant organisation, and they've been working their socks off to get Labour to see the error of its first-past-the-post ways. Keir Starmer's a bit stodgy, frankly, when it comes to anything to do with the Green movement. I mean, I don't know how much we're going to go into the politics of this, probably not too much, I would imagine. But the Conservative government is just so unbelievably bad at so many things, not least on the energy front. For Labour, it's like being offered one little treat after the next. Yes, sir, we've completely screwed up on actually meeting our goals around some of these renewable energy targets. Yes, we're going to bring back fracking. Yes, we think all of these things. Yes, we want more nuclear. We want all this stuff. And Labour Party sort of sits there and says, oh, no, that's not right. We shouldn't be doing that. And though I much admire Ed Miliband, he does need to get a sort of pencil up his backbone or something so that he really and truly get stuck into Labour on this energy story, because it's one of their biggest weaknesses. So for me, I'm looking to Labour now to raise their game, because they're not doing what a good opposition party should be doing.
Let's talk about energy, because it is something that is hyper relevant for people, because the costs now are just so extreme, and so it's happening so quickly as well. At Planted, we're here. We have indeed become the first design event to run a completely off-grid event. It's clearly something people want to understand more about, and we've, I think, in partnership with Solcell, is showing that it is possible to run events in a more sustainable way. But is energy one of the areas we really should have a reason to be optimistic? The technology's there, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the technology's there. And it's extraordinary when you actually look at what could be done now with solar and wind in particular, but some of the other renewable energy technologies that we don't hear so much about, tidal and geothermal and biomass and so on. These technologies now are the future of global energy systems. There's literally no question about that now. And you've got extremely eminent academics and very kind of plugged in consultancies and think tanks all saying now that the future of the entire world should be based on renewable electricity. And we could get there by 2050. We could get to almost 100% renewables by 2050. We really pressed the climate emergency button. We could do this. That's not the answer to it all, obviously, before you point that out to me, because we can't just do it on renewable electricity. You have to focus on efficiency. And the really criminal thing, and I do mean this, criminal thing that is happening in the UK today, unlike the rest of Europe, is this government refuses to address the issue of appalling low-quality housing in the UK, which needs to be retrofitted so urgently, which would make the biggest difference to the economy, the biggest difference to the issue of fuel poverty in this country, and push forward our energy systems faster than anything else. I don't think we're going to hear terribly much in the mini budget today about energy efficiency. I've always loved to be proved wrong when I make rude and scurrilous comments about Tory politicians. Nothing pleases me more than to be shown the error of my ways. But frankly, they are consistent offenders. They very rarely get it right, and they never get the efficiency stuff right. So what's their answer to the war in Ukraine? To the spike in gas prices? Fracking. Jesus Christ. Fracking. Open up more licenses in the North Sea, none of which will come on stream for at least another 10 years. Fracking won't make any difference to our energy supply issues here in the UK, if it ever happens, which it almost certainly won't, by the way. The really big thing we should be doing is pressing the efficiency story every time, plus renewables. That really is what we have to get right now.
So, I mean, why don't we?
Oh, God. Well, there's something about, most politicians, to be honest, who are focused on what are called supply-side issues. So build new stuff, because then they can go and open it and look good. And they never focus on demand issues, which are to do with the uses to which we put the energy that we are supplying into the market. And actually, no politician, really, no party really has got this right. We still focus too much on supply and not on demand. It's a kind of mind thing, a blockage thing. It's also because Treasury consistently argued for more than 30 years that you can make a bigger contribution to the UK economy out of the supply side of things, building stuff, than you could out of the demand management side of things. All the studies now, all the new work that's coming out now shows that the contribution to economic well-being in this country would be much greater from addressing efficiency in buildings, manufacturing, and most particularly in our domestic housing stock. The economic gain for the UK would be much greater than anything else we can do on the supply side. So it's a huge blockage going on deep in the sort of cerebral capabilities of politicians of this generation.
And an absolute obsession and commitment to growth at all costs?
Oh, God. Okay, so do we know we're in the world of growth now? I'm told that there is a rumour, and I'm going to just share this rumour with you because I'm loving it so much. So you probably know that Jacob Rees-Mogg is our new Secretary of State in BEIS, which used to be called the DTI, and then it changed its name to Business, Energy and Innovation. There is a rumour going around that Jacob Rees-Mogg wants to change the name of the department to MOG, the Ministry of Growth. So we will have Jacob Rees-Mogg in charge of MOG, and I am loving this. I am getting such a buzz out of the degree to which our political systems have hit depths of surrealism that nobody could ever once have imagined. So look, kind of passing compensation for what is going on out there. But it's all growth. It's all growth. I mean, for God's sake, they've gone completely growth crazy. So we will hear today decisions about these new enterprise zones, which will consist on relaxing planning laws. It will depend on reducing environmental standards, so people will find it easier to pollute than they already do, which is already pretty easy. And we will see all of these things being set aside simply to promote growth. But don't forget, Keir Starmer, what did he say when he was trying to match Tony Blair's education? Politicians think we are very simple people. We do these yabba, yabba, yabba things. Keir Starmer obviously wanted his own Tony Blair troika of the same word. Growth, growth, growth. That's what he said. That's his big thing for the Labour Party. Growth, growth, growth. I'm honestly thinking that he and Jacob Rees-Mogg ought to have a kind of love tryst.
Well, perhaps we could rebrand it the Mob, Ministry of Bullshit. But
the Mob. Thank you.
The Mob.
Yeah,
you can have that one, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Worth the visit alone for that.
Take that away.
Jonathan, let's. And lots of people, we want to talk about solutions to the climate emergency, things that people can tangibly do to actually make a difference. I think more and more people, and I think certainly the brands and the businesses we're looking to promote here are the ones who actually are genuinely accountable for what they produce, and they try and actually say that we are trying to design things in a circular way. We take responsibility for anything that we put in terms of damage to the land. We are responsible for people and planet. And what are the tangible things that people can do? I mean, talk about perhaps about finance in how they spend their money. What are the things people can do here today to make a difference in your view?
Yes. It's strange we're still having to think like that, isn't it, in a way? Because we sort of, by virtue of the fact you're sitting here on a Friday, cloudy day, you sort of know what it is that you need to do. I can just guess that. And most of those things have been with us as opportunities for individual lifestyle changes for decades, frankly. So still do what we need to do around all of that, around energy, around travel, around food. In particular, how we buy, what we buy, where we buy it from. Food is a absolutely critical go-to part of the overall efficiency. But Sam, you mentioned something very interesting there. People tend not to think so much about what they're doing with their money. If they're lucky enough to have a pension or investments or an ISA, how do you know that your pension or your ISA isn't invested in companies that are happily out there screwing up the planet on your behalf, while you're doing your very best through your own lifestyle to make sure the planet is protected as much as possible? And thinking about this stuff from a financial point of view is becoming more and more important. So I'm constantly reminding people, try and be consistent about all of this, because it's crucial to do that. But you do have to support the people, the entrepreneurs, the small companies that are out there doing these good things. We have to support them with our purchasing power. It's not easy being a small green company in a very hostile economic climate. It's not easy, and it needs all the support that we can give them. So sometimes it seems like a tiny thing, but the choice that you make between one option and another option may seem very small to you. It may actually be a very big part of what allows that company then to prosper.
I mean, who are the high street brands, for example? That
I'm not going there. No way.
None?
No.
Planted?
No. Look, I'm always a bit nervous about singling out one high street store over another, because then you think, I don't want you all rushing off to get your sandwiches there rather than your sandwiches anywhere else. It's not really about that, is it? It's sort of something we have to be a little bit careful about. And most businesses, to be fair, are doing a lot more than they were 10 years ago. And that was a lot more than they were doing 10 years before that. So they're all on an incremental change basis. Let's be honest. Consumer pressure, public pressure in general, legislation has changed everything. But it's far too slow. That's the story. It's just far too slow.
Lastly, Jonathan, I'm conscious of your time and very grateful for you being here. But could you, in a nutshell, just sum up what should we be hopeful or should we be pessimistic? I know you've titled your book in the way that you have, and a nice alliteration there, which I'm sure appeals as a former English teacher. But what should we be hopeful?
Yes, I was slightly upset when I was doing an introduction to my book. This was last year, not this year, and someone had bought the book before bringing it over to me to sign, and just above the Hope in Hell, in large red letters, they'd written "Not A." And I thought it's a bit hard. The book doesn't really say that. The book is genuinely about what authentic hope looks like, and I would urge you to distinguish between authentic hope and what I call shiny optimism. There are a lot of shiny optimists out there, people who just think we can tweak a technology innovation like this and hey presto, everything will be fine. We won't have to examine our way of life more carefully. We won't have to think about deeper responsibilities for other countries, for future generations and so on. It's not like that. That kind of shiny optimism is actually a real problem, because it allows an awful lot of people not to think more deeply about the changes that are needed. So I talk about authentic hope in the book, which comes from these different sources, from the nature of our society today, with huge numbers of people now wanting to do the right thing. It sometimes is invisible, you can't see it, but it's just millions, hundreds of millions of people all around the world wanting to do the right thing now, but blocked from doing it. From the technology, I'm not anti-technology, we need that technology, but it's not the answer in itself. And from the ways in which now, increasingly, and I think this is very important, we can work together globally to bring forward a different approach to this. When I started doing green politics, you were stuck pretty much in your own backyard or your individual nation state. It was hard to build the international collaboration that makes such a difference today. So these are all very, very powerful strands of thinking. Last point, it is too late to avoid some really seriously bad stuff happening. We've just gone over those thresholds now. So every single day that you and me have left to us on this planet, however young or old you may be, every single day will, in one way or another, be shaped by the climate crisis. Every single person on this planet will feel the impact of that crisis for the whole of the rest of our lives. There's no getting round that. But it is not too late to avoid that turning into something even more dreadful than that looks a lot like a kind of civilizational collapse, a real horror story from the perspective of the lives of billions of people. That's the issue. It's too late for some things, it's not too late for others.
Well, Jonathon, a very sobering but important message, and also a wonderful half an hour spent in Jonathon's company here. I'd like to thank him for being here as part of Planted today. Thank you, Jonathon Porritt.
Thank you very much. Thank you.